And now, downsizing, in case you were ever wondering what the word insufferable would look like if adapted into a feature-length film. Wow, what a letdown this turned out to be. Downsizing might not be the worst movie of 2017, or even the worst movie of 2017 not featuring Aquaman, but it could well be the most disappointing. Here's a textbook example of how a good cast, a respected director, and a killer premise can still be completely and utterly pissed away under the right circumstances. The premise of Downsizing is that in the near future, scientists have figured out how to successfully and safely shrink human beings down to about the size of action figures, with the original goal being to gradually convince the human race as a whole to shrink itself down, and indeed the entirety of human civilization down, as well as a concerted effort to save the environment by dramatically reducing the amount of resources we need to live on. Unfortunately for the world, this is an Alexander Payne movie, so those lofty goals quickly get scuttled by human nature. Shrinking mostly becomes popular as a way for third world dictators to deal with unruly dissidents, and is a lifestyle trend for the American upper middle class, with unsatisfied suburbanites opting to shrink themselves down and move to dollhouse scale gated communities where they can live as tiny millionaires because their money goes so much farther at that scale. Ha ha ha. Matt Damon is our would-be hero, a performatively idealistic dweeb who goes through the so-called downsizing procedure, ha ha ha, with his wife, played by Kristen Wiig, only to wake up and discover that she got cold feet at the last minute and won't be joining him in Tiny Town, which leads to a divorce, which means he's now both permanently downsized and, after the divorce settlement, basically only a little better off than he was as a full-size person. Bummer. However, his situation changes for the more interesting, I guess, when he makes unexpected new friends in the form of Christoph Waltz as his slick, constantly partying, black market smuggler upstairs neighbor, and Hong Chow as a feisty, one-legged Vietnamese political dissident shrunken against her will, and now working as a house cleaner and go-to good Samaritan among the shrunken city's impoverished immigrant underclass, which exists, as it turns out, much to Matt Damon's surprise, because social satire, don't you get it? Ha ha ha. And speaking of satire, would it surprise you to learn that Chow's poverty-stricken do-gooder and Waltz's conspicuously consumptive pan-European hedonist, who would seem to have almost nothing in common with each other, would come to more or less agree that the earnest suburban American try-hard good guy could stand to get the hell over himself and focus on, wait for it, the little things in life. Ha ha, oh boy, it doesn't sound like they wrote this back in 2004 at all, does it? Because they did, as it turns out. Alright, now look, the smug, heavy-handed shtick is tiresome as a given, but what really sinks Downsizing is that it finds almost nothing to really do with what would seem like an incredibly fertile premise brimming with possibilities. The best part is the extended first act, where we get to see all the details of how the downsized and regular-sized people interact with the world, the process of downsizing itself, the running and operations of the tiny city, etc. But once that's all out of the way and Payne has gotten to tell the surprisingly limited number of obvious rote LOL American capitalism jokes, and is just gotten all that out of his system, there's just nowhere for it to go. Damon has kind of a growth arc, and there's a weird international sojourn in Act 3 that I guess it would be too much of a spoiler to really talk about, but it's all just so much moralism and dreary sarcasm. And one of the big problems is, unfortunately, Hong Chow, or rather her character, who's been interestingly absent from Downsizing's marketing. It's not that she's badly acted. Chow is clearly gifted and has the energy and commitment to indicate that she could be a star in the making, but she's been saddled with a role that even in this arch, on-the-nose, obvious piece of shit movie can't help but play as an almost shockingly out-of-date stereotype. Now, there's actually been some controversy about this, because a lot of critics came out of the early festival screenings bagging on this character and centered their complaints on the fact that she speaks with an exaggerated, almost cartoonish broken English accent, which, yes, is very surprising to hear in an otherwise sort of serious-minded movie from 2017. I'd do an impression of it to explain, but out of me it's going to sound super racist, so I won't. But it later turned out that this was a conscious creative decision by the actress with some real thought behind it, as opposed to something that the director just asked for, so I guess it's always good to double-check that sort of thing. Unfortunately, the voice and performance aren't the real problem here. Rather, it's that while Chow is struggling mightily to invest her role with pathos and complexity, the screenplay is determined to frame her as the laziest possible cliche for an Asian actress to have in this kind of story. The demanding, high-maintenance pixie who benignly bullies the clueless white guy into becoming the better, more selfless version of himself with matter-of-fact homespun wisdom. Holy shit, Damon just got done doing this in that Great Wall movie I just realized. Wow.
And as much as I like the idea of her and Waltz's characters as two sides of Damon's conscience who, instead of arguing, wind up agreeing that he's just kind of a dumbass, you keep waiting for her to emerge as a character apart from her relationship to him, and it just never comes. Instead, simply delivering another tired retread of a sainted woman of color who exists solely to nudge a white hero into better behavior and then confer the blessing of her own symbolism upon him. You can see what the movie wants to do with the character, but it uses her like a moralizing prop, and it's honestly one of the most uncomfortable versions of this trope that I've seen in a major movie since Spanglish. Christoph Waltz, on the other hand, is kind of awesome in this. Not enough to salvage it, but he's a lot of fun all the same. He's not doing what you think of as the typical Christoph Waltz performance. At first it seems like he'll end up as a villain of the piece, but instead he's just more of a decent, if shady and shallow guy who's honest with himself in a way the hero isn't, and probably ends up being a better friend than Damon probably deserves. I get that the point here is that the supposed main character is a boring dipshit, but I'd still rather have seen a movie just about him and the Vietnamese woman. And again, once the main story is settled in, they stop trying to do anything interesting with the core idea of the premise, either in terms of world building or visual invention. It feels like there were a million places Downsizing could have gone with this, and for some shocking reason they settled on being irritating, preachy, and dull, despite the obvious intentions. Nowhere near as clever as insightful as it thinks it is. 1.5 stars, a very big disappointment.